The enemies of Jesus Christ, the very people who had him killed, never once claimed the tomb was still full. And that silence is one of the most powerful pieces of evidence for the resurrection ever recorded. Welcome back to the Empty Tomb channel. Today we are opening the case file that sits at the very heart of Christianity, the empty tomb. If the resurrection didn't happen, the tomb was not empty. And if the tomb was not empty, someone would have said so. Someone would have gone there and pointed to the body. Someone would have ended Christianity before it even started. So why didn't they? Today we are going to look at this question from all sides. We are going to look at what the friends of Jesus said, what the enemies of Jesus said, and what the Roman government said. And when you put all three together, the conclusion is unavoidable. Let's open the case. Let's start with the most overlooked piece of evidence in this entire case. Matthew chapter 28. After the resurrection, the Roman soldiers who were guarding the tomb went to the chief priests and reported what had happened. These were trained Roman guards, men who faced execution if they fell asleep on duty, and they reported that the tomb was empty. Now here is where it gets remarkable. The chief priests, the very men who had Jesus arrested, tried, and crucified, did not say the tomb was still full. They did not go to the tomb and point to the body. They could not, because there was no body to point to. So what did they do instead? They bribed the guards. They paid them to spread a lie, that the disciples had come in the night and stolen the body while the guards were asleep. Think about that for a moment. The enemies of Jesus, the people with every reason and every resource to disprove the resurrection, chose to pay for a cover story instead of simply going to the tomb and showing everyone the body. You only need a cover story when the truth is too dangerous to admit. And the truth was, the tomb was empty, and they knew it. Here is a detail that does not get enough attention. After the resurrection, where did the disciples go to preach? They went to Jerusalem, the exact city where Jesus had been crucified and buried just weeks earlier. Think about what that means. If the tomb was still full, if the body of Jesus was still lying there, all anyone had to do was walk to the tomb and point to it. The entire Christian movement would have collapsed on day one. Nobody would have believed the resurrection if the body was still there. Jerusalem was not a big city. The tomb of Jesus was known. It was accessible. And yet, nobody went to the tomb and pointed to the body. Not the Pharisees, not the Roman authorities, not the Jewish council, nobody. Because there was nothing there to point to. The disciples risked their lives preaching the resurrection in the very city where it happened. That is not the behavior of people who made up a story. That is the behavior of people who knew exactly what they had seen. Now here is the most remarkable piece of evidence of all. The Jewish Talmud, the ancient collection of Jewish religious writings, references Jesus and his followers. And in doing so, it never once claims that the resurrection story was false because the body was still in the tomb. In fact, the earliest Jewish response to the resurrection claim was not to say the tomb was full. It was to say the disciples stole the body. That is the story the chief priests paid the guards to tell. And that story, that desperate, paid-for cover story, actually confirms the one thing that everyone agreed on. The tomb was empty. Friend and enemy alike agreed on one thing. The body of Jesus was gone. The debate was never about whether the tomb was empty. The debate was about why it was empty. And there are only two possible answers. Either someone took the body, or Jesus rose from the dead. So let's look at the theft theory. The disciples stole the body, past a sealed tomb, past a squad of Roman guards, men who faced execution for failure. In the middle of the night, without being seen or heard, carried the body to an unknown location. And then every single one of them went on to spend the rest of their lives being imprisoned, beaten, and executed for claiming they had seen Jesus risen from the dead. Not one of them ever confessed. Not one of them ever said, "Actually, we made the whole thing up." Not one. People do not die for something they know is a lie. They die for what they believe is true. And every single one of those disciples believed, with everything they had, that they had seen Jesus alive after his death. Our expert witness today lived just one generation after the resurrection. Justin Martyr was a Christian philosopher writing around 150 AD, close enough to the events that eyewitnesses were still alive. He wrote directly to the Roman emperor defending Christianity. And in his writings, he references the bribery of the guards and challenges anyone to investigate the empty tomb for themselves. He wrote this challenge publicly to the Roman government in a document that still exists today. If the tomb had been full, if there had been any evidence that the resurrection was a lie, the Romans would have used it. They had every political reason to crush Christianity. But they couldn't produce a body, because there was no body to produce. So let's bring this back to the jury. The tomb was empty. Everyone agreed on that, friend and enemy alike. The enemies of Jesus chose bribery over evidence because they had no evidence to offer. The disciples preached the resurrection in Jerusalem, the one city where a body in a tomb would have destroyed their entire message. And not one person in the history of the ancient world ever produced the body of Jesus Christ. The tomb was empty, the body was gone, and 2,000 years later, nobody has ever been able to explain where it went. Except one explanation, the one the disciples proclaimed from the very beginning. He is not here, he has risen. But here is what comes next. We have looked at the prophecies. We have looked at the historical evidence. Now let's look at the numbers. The mathematical probability of one person fulfilling all of these prophecies by chance is so staggering, so far beyond the realm of coincidence, that even secular mathematicians have struggled to explain it. That is the next case file. Subscribe to the Empty Tomb channel and follow the evidence.